I'd like your states restored to their practical relations with the Union immediately.
Mainly, I think Stephen and I realized that you can't rush the cuts. You have to let somebody look. I like the eyes looking at each other. I love that. When people look at each other, they feel it. If Lincoln would say something, I'd hold on him and he looks. And then we go to the Confederate vice president, he's looking. So we didn't rush it. We gave people time to think about what they're seeing. And it was the way to work. It's not an action picture.
Scenes play for long periods of time in one angle. I just wanted the scenes to exist in seemingly real time. And if I had gotten too fancy with too many reaction shots and too many cutaways, I think it would have taken away. It would have drawn the attention away from some very complicated political points that Lincoln was trying to make.
I use the law allowing for the seizure of property in a war, knowing it applies only to the property of governments and citizens of belligerent nations. But the South ain't a nation. That's why I can't negotiate with them.
So I needed the audience to lean forward, to pay utter attention to what was being said. And in order to do that, I didn't get fancy with the scissors or with the lens.
James Brooks, name.
This was not something that required John Williams' music to necessarily set the pace of the drama. It needed to support the gravitas of what was being talked about. It was a very subtle job of scoring this movie.
I have been very familiar with Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, but in thinking about writing the music for Lincoln, my first thought was that perhaps all the music should be only music that Lincoln had heard in his life. We know quite a bit, but I didn't think enough, at least for my purposes. And so this led me to conclude that in order for me to find what I needed for this particular scene or that particular scene, that I had to make it myself. I can't speak for Stephen, certainly, but I would guess that this particular project, Lincoln, was viewed by him as a great responsibility and a daunting orchestra in Chicago. Someday we should do something with them, never really thinking that would be practical. And as we approached the time to make decisions about where, when, and how to do Lincoln, I think Stephen said, wouldn't it be a great time to have your friends now at the Chicago Symphony perform? So we recorded at Symphony Hall in Chicago, and the performances are extraordinary, actually, personal, and of very, very high artistic quality. And the recording in Symphony Hall is very successful, has a beautiful low end. I don't know if people watching this film think about these kinds of things, but the bass response in the orchestral recordings is particularly good. And it was wonderful that we were in Illinois with the orchestra, because Illinois was the first state to ratify the 13th Amendment. So I thought that was a very nice spiritual connection.
Stephen cautioned me that this was not similar to previous projects we'd worked on. Most of what I had been connected with, the Indiana Jones films, for instance, were loud, bombastic movies full of flame and fire and fights. And this was going to be very different, he said.
As a sound guy, you think, okay, we're going to have Lincoln's going to be some Civil War battles and fighting, and the superficial sound guy part of even Ben Burt probably thought the same thing. The more battles, the better. Really, the only battle in the movie is the first scene. It's hand-to-hand combat, the opening battle. So yeah, the real sounds of battle exist for a little bit. We get our sound guy glory of fighting and punches and sloshing in mud. Then we never have that kind of sound again. And then from then on, yeah, the soundtrack is full of clock ticks. And clock ticks in this movie thematically work because you get the sense of history and time weighing down on the president, because there's this civil war going on. He has to make decisions. You know, how does he deal with things? And there's kind of a weight to his dealing with these issues. And something about clocks, especially old clocks, feel like there's a weight.
There's no recordings of the period at that time. Audio recording really wasn't invented until about 10 years after Lincoln was assassinated, but I thought that perhaps there would be artifacts in museums or in collections around the country that might have objects that Lincoln actually heard in his life. And so I set about researching where are things that Lincoln actually heard. And it led down many interesting paths. But I very much wanted to get the sound of one of his watches ticking. And that led me to search out the existence of his watches. There's a few of them still around. The Smithsonian has one. I contacted them, and there was a great deal of discussion took place about could the watch be wound up, and if so, would it work or would it get damaged and this sort of thing. And after a few months of thinking about that, the Smithsonian decided that it was just too risky to handle that watch that they had. I was a bit disappointed. But I found another watch, which actually turned out to be even better because it's the watch that Lincoln had in his pocket when he went to Ford's Theater. And there's no way to absolutely prove that, but this was a watch given to Robert Lincoln after his father's assassination and was held by him for many years, given to a friend, and found its way into the Kentucky Historical Society just a few years ago. They had never wound it up to see if it functioned. And they brought a watchsmith out, and they carefully wound it up, and by golly, there it was, ticking away. And so I sent Greg Smith, one of my recording partners, there to Kentucky to record the watch. And they let Greg record it from the front, from the back. They opened the watch up, and he put a little tiny mic inside the watch, so we got it from every perspective. And when I got those recordings back, it was really a thrill to know that this ticking was the sound that was around every time Lincoln was probably alone in his office. But I also had another objective, which was to record the clock that was in Lincoln's office, his executive office in the White House in 1865, because I read that clock still exists and it's still in the White House. And I made a request, could we come and record the clocks, or specifically a clock in the White House that was there during Lincoln's time. And they graciously invited us to come and do it. And so when Lincoln is alone in his office and they're voting on the 13th Amendment, there's a very nice moment where there's a little ticking of the clock. And then you begin to hear the bells ringing. And historically, that's one of the things that actually happened. And in fact, we went out and recorded the church bells that are there today in Washington within earshot of the White House, the actual bells that Lincoln would have heard, because those bells are still in St. John's Church and in the Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. And there were cannon emplacements around the city for its defense, but they were instructed to have a victory celebration, a cannonade to celebrate this vote. And so we actually had the clock, we had the right bells, and we had the cannons, which we recorded some live Civil War cannons at Manassas battlefield, and we could put it all together, so it was very realistic.
You could have heard a pin drop on the set, absolute silence. And Daniel spent all day crooked, bent awkwardly into this bed. He was playing dead. And then it was the end of the day, and Stephen had got what he wanted, it was cut, and then that was the end, and it was so odd. It was the end of the film. Lincoln died, and that was it, and nobody really knew what to do because it was so sad.
It's all over. The president is no more.
Everybody then just started hugging and crying. It was the most peculiar thing. I'd love to hear what everybody else said.
I think that's a common experience that we all have, not just actors, directors, but anyone that works on films. You're not quite sure what to do with yourself when it's finished. The investment has usually, for most of us, been a close to total investment of that period of our lives in the process of telling that particular story. So it's very hard to conceive of any kind of a life after it. Of course, there is one waiting.
usually quite impatiently. But in this particular case, I felt two things at one and the same time. One was a sense of immeasurable privilege at having been enabled to explore that man's life. And the other was a sense of great sadness and loss that that time allowed me was now over. Because he did become, for me, there's never been a human being that I never met that I loved as much as him, ever. I doubt there ever will be.
When it was over, it was over. And I was pretty set adrift, you know, the fact that I wasn't going to be able to come to work with Daniel Day-Lewis. One of the greatest experiences, if not the greatest experience in my professional life. So when Daniel asked for me to come into his trailer, sort of to say goodbye after the last shot, Daniel sat down with his English accent. And he suddenly started talking to me as Daniel, and the tears came down my face, and it was very hard. It was a very tough pill to swallow, because I think he let me down in the only way he could and knew how to do, and he let himself down the same way. He instantly became himself. Of course, I think he was himself with his wife and family, but I only got to see the Abraham Lincoln side of him. And in that sense, I felt I got to know the President of the United States, arguably the greatest President of the United States. It wasn't a game we were playing. It wasn't method acting. It was sincerely, when Daniel came on to the set, he was Abraham Lincoln, not just to me, but to other actors in the scene and to the entire crew. And we all went home feeling a little emptier because we weren't going to really have that proximity any longer.
Every era since Lincoln lived has appropriated him for various political purposes. He remains the ideal of a president. And I think the main relevance, I think, of Lincoln is that it is possible to achieve radical, even revolutionary transformation of society through electoral democracy.
I'd like to get the 13th Amendment through the House and on its way to ratification by the states, wrap the whole slavery thing up forever and aye as soon as I'm able, now, end of this month. And I'd like you to stand behind me, like my cabinet's most always done.
Nothing would have mattered more to Lincoln than to know that the Lincoln Memorial has become an iconic place for movements over time. Of course, Martin Luther King and the I Have a Dream speech going there, various movements, anti-war movements, idealistic movements, things taking place. So I think the idea at the end of the movie of knowing that it didn't stop in 1865, but what Lincoln fought for has somehow infused people over time. It's a very moving way to show that the influence of this man and this leader continues on to the present day.
Lincoln exemplifies leadership. I think when you start to read his speeches and you look back at how he conducted himself as president, I think it does make you realize it's difficult for somebody to really do the job that Lincoln did today. And I think that Lincoln had more opportunity than leaders do today to really access the people around him and try to find the right thing to do.
No one's ever been loved so much by the people. You might do anything now. Don't waste that power on an amendment bill that's sure of defeat.
This movie feels very current. And it resonates so enormously on a world level about the difficulty, the messiness, the complicated nature of democracy, and how long it takes to really have it work.
We say all we've done is show the world that democracy isn't chaos, that there is a great invisible strength in a people's union. Say we've shown that a people can endure awful sacrifice and yet cohere. Mightn't that save at least the idea of democracy to aspire to?